1877. So recall that we do have an all-black legislature right about this time period. Recall that we also have some local ordinances, things that were also taking place because changes were happening locally. There was a local ordinance that was passed in 1877 locally that said that the residents of St. Helena's Island could no longer have their taxes being used to help support education. What was Penn School to do? That was something local. Again, laws make changes.
Greetings. My name is Thomas Ezekiel Miller, born in Freeville, South Carolina in 1849, right here in Beaufort County. My mother was the mixed-race daughter of Judge Thomas Hayward, and my father was a white man. And I was raised by what were known as free Negroes. I went to Charleston and attended one of the first underground schools for free black children. And after the Civil War, I went north to attend Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. Then came the period known as the Reconstruction Era, where the government seemed at long last to do right by our people. They passed the 13th Amendment, outlawing slavery, the 14th Amendment, making us citizens, and the 15th Amendment, giving our men the right to vote. We began to fill the halls of elected office. So I returned to South Carolina to attend the University of South Carolina. That's no mistake, the University of South Carolina, Columbia. Because the Reconstruction legislature opened up the school in 1873 for all races. And a black professor named Richard Theodore Greener, the first African-American to graduate from Harvard University, became the man who ran the library. I graduated with my law degree in 1875 and became a school commissioner in Beaufort County, as well as the House of Representatives. But then, dark times came. You see, in Pulaski, Tennessee, 6 Confederate veterans gathered to form the Reconstruction Resistance Army. They took their name from the Greek word for circle, which is kuklos, and the Scottish word for family, which is clan. And of course, you know the rest of that story. So, many whites felt that racial equality would put them at the bottom of society. They went on the attack, as well as the wealthy who sought cheap labor by dividing and conquering the poor of both races to have them fight against each other so that they could stay on top. In South Carolina, we had the groups like the Sweetwater Sable Club and the Red Church. The former was led by a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Ryan Tillman of Trenton, South Carolina. And they terrorized African Americans in Hamburg and Ellington. But what is not often known is that many times the African Americans gave as good as they got in places like Cane Hoy and in Charleston on Broad Street on November the 8th, 1876. The state was drenched with blood. And the federal government grew weary of this. So in 1877, they passed the Tilden-Hayes Compromise, which told the South, you're on your own. Do as you see fit. But what you don't hear often is it wasn't done without a fight. You see, by 1895, Benjamin Tillman, who during his term as governor, sent an African-American in Denmark, South Carolina named John Peterson to a lynch mob. He became the senator in 1894. And so they tried to officially take our rights away at the South Carolina Constitutional Convention in 1895. And I was one of 6 blacks, along with Beaufort's finest, Robert Smalls, James Wigg, Isaiah Reed, William Whipper, and from Georgetown, South Carolina, Robert Anderson. We went to Columbia and tried to put a stop to this plan. On October the 25th, 1895, I said these words to the State House in Columbia. Call us aliens. We, aliens? The people who are the foundation of the American civilization? Aliens? A people by our sweat, assisted in clothing the barren rocks of the Northeast, who drained the swamps of the South and made them to mimic gold in harvest time, who by our endurance, toil, and suffering made it possible for our white neighbors to establish this government, the asylum of us all, who by our toil established the canal and railroad systems of this country. Call us aliens, then to whom can the term citizens be applied? I want a united people. Let us forever bury all both races of the past. Let us try to bear and forbear. Let us strive to bind up the wounds, old wounds of long, long ago, with bandages of loving kindness between the two races. God has placed your race and my race here on this continent. Together, it is our lot to dwell. O countrymen of this Southland, one and all, white and black, let us be just to one another. Let us at all times speak only the truth about our people and of the old state. Let us labor to unite our people for the good of the people in common. Let us secure to our children prosperity and happiness founded upon the rock of justice, peace, and justice and peace. But in spite of our bold words, we lost that battle. The representatives voted on December the 4th, 1895, 116 to 7, to take away our voting and equal rights. And at the end of that convention, they joined hands and sang, "God be with you until we meet again." And 201, the African American representatives refused to sign that Constitution. My colleague Robert Small said that before I sign that rag of a Constitution, I will walk home to Beaufort. However, we are heartened by this one fact. 2 white representatives, T.E. Dudley of Marlborough County and John Halston Reed of Georgetown, joined us in opposing these laws because they were such a gross violation of the 15th and 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. So I then resigned from politics and became the founding president of South Carolina State University, Orangeburg, South Carolina. But I lived to see some redemption. You see, the last African American in Congress was George Henry White of North Carolina. And upon his last day in Congress, he said that one day, Phoenix-like, we shall rise again and come back into these hallowed halls. And that came true in 1928. Oscar DePriest of Chicago became the first African American to return to Congress after Reconstruction. And so during Negro History Week, February 11, 1930, that great gentleman, Oscar DePriest, got up in Congress and said, "I hereby welcome 2 members of the former Reconstruction Congress upon this floor to commemorate all that they have done. One of them was John Lynch of Mississippi. The other one was yours truly." And so therefore, in returning to that House of Representatives, before I passed away in 1938, I saw some redemption, but the true redemption came in 1965 on the passing of the Voting Rights Act. Thank you. Well, now that I told you all that, are there any questions? Yes.
I have trouble wrapping my head around the fact that the country as a whole passed the amendments to the Constitution,
Right.
and then turned around and didn't enforce them.
I'm glad you brought that up. What happened essentially was this. You see, as mentioned before, the wealthy powers that be in the southern states thrived off the fact that the poor and exploited white class, they basically misdirected their anger toward the African Americans. So because as long as the 2 groups kept at each other's throats, the wealthy whites could benefit from the cheap labor of both. And so the poor whites were inoculated with the idea that equality for black people would put them at the bottom of society. And they weren't having that. So those 2 main factors were the cause of that. And so as a result, they had what was called the shotgun policy back in the 1870s, where the Klan and Benjamin Tillman and all the others, they were determined to sort of refight the Civil War, if you will, and basically fight against the idea of having African-American representatives and that sort of thing. And so the bloodshed got to be so much that the North just had enough, wanted nothing more to do with it. And so with the Tilden-Hayes Compromise, the federal troops were taken from the South, and the people like Benjamin Tillman here in South Carolina, James Vardaman in Mississippi, Hoke Smith in Georgia, and all those others, they came to power based on the resentment of the poor whites, you see. And so that's what happened. But they didn't go through all that, as I just was traumatized. They didn't do all of that without a fight. Gletzon. I'm currently writing a book right now on that 1895 Constitution Convention.
Good.
Okay. All right. That was a good one. Are there any others? Going once?
How long were
Yes.
you at South Carolina State?
Oh, I was at the University of South Carolina.
Okay, no, but what you said you founded the South Carolina State.
No. Oh.
Sorry.
Okay. Now I have to get back in the character.
Put him back in there.
That was good. Okay. He was there from 1873 to 1875.
Okay.
Because what happened essentially was that the Reconstruction legislature integrated the University of South Carolina, and that was the only university in the South, the Deep South, that was integrated. The other was Maria College in Kentucky, but which stayed integrated until 1898 or so. And incidentally, the founder of Black History Month, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, went to the integrated Maria College in Kentucky as an undergrad before he went to Harvard. A little known fact. But getting back to USC though, so in 1873, a black man from around Marlboro, I believe it was, named Henry Hayne, integrated the school, and a number of the professors and the students left, but still enough of them stayed, so it was solving. So many African Americans came there, and plus, it was the first time that the university admitted female students also. They had a normal school for the training of female teachers. And if anybody here is from Columbia, there was a lady named Celia Dial Saxton, who became a well-known African-American teacher who graduated from there. So that was the situation until after the Tilden Hayes Compromise, Governor Wade Hampton shut the university down, and it later emerged as a segregated institution. But ironically, it was Wade Hampton who signed the diplomas of the last black graduates of the school until 1963. And there's a statue of Richard T. Greener, the African-American librarian, is next to the library right now. Yes?
How much of the North's turning its collective back on the South in this situation?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
How much of the North's inclination to turn its back on the South during this time was due, you think, to just war weariness? Otherwise, it just seems like their conscience just evaporated.
Okay, that's a very good question. Now, the question was that how much of the North turning back on the South was due to war weariness. It was a number of things. It was a combination of that, and then the idea of these African Americans producing competent governments. Now, you have to understand, too, that in Louisiana, they had a black governor named Pinckney Benton Stewart Pinchback for a few months in 1873, who started Southern University. And here in South Carolina, the Reconstruction government had a constitution in 1868 that forbade discrimination. They set up hospitals, mental institutions. They allowed women to divorce abusive husbands, and all of these things. And the idea for many of the poor whites of the South that African Americans were being that competent, that just hardened their inferiority complex, and they're like, we can't deal with all of that. So therefore, through not only did they rebel, they also had propagandists to make these guys look like ignorant and drunken fools. So thus, there's a movie called Birth of a Nation made in 1915 that deals with that. So it was a combination of those things that told the North, that made the North say, forget this, we're moving on. And there you have it. Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about how they were able to, or how the people that passed the 1895 Constitution were able to make that convention almost all white? And then in what ways did that convention take away, or the new Constitution, take away the rights of the blacks? Is this the Jim Crow laws and that sort of thing?
Yes, let me explain how that situation worked. You see, by this point, they were doing all sorts of things to get around the 15th Amendment. They would have what was called the Understanding Clause, which meant that a white person could go to the polling booth, and if they could sign their name with an X, they could vote. But if a black person could recite Shakespeare or something like that, or had a Harvard PhD, they would say that the registrar had the right to deny the person who they felt was unfit the right to vote. And that was their way of getting around that and having a mostly white convention, with the exception of majority black counties like Georgetown and Beaufort. which sent representatives, including the men who I just discussed. So basically, that's how that situation was. So essentially, the 1895 Constitution hardened the concept that the registrar, who was going to be a white person regardless, had the right to deny a person the right to vote based on what they call the understanding clause. It was supposed to be a literacy test, but there was a representative named William Henderson from Berkeley who said, look, forget all this fair election stuff. If we allow that, the blacks will learn to read faster than us. Oh, we're not having that. See? So that was their way of getting around the 15th Amendment. And then Williams versus Mississippi, a lawsuit around 1899 that reached the Supreme Court, said that, hey, that's okay because they're declining votes based on qualifications, you see. And that was the law of the South until the 1940s, when Judge Julius Waring up in Charleston basically ended the whole idea of white primaries and that kind of thing. And then the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, pretty much killed all that. Excuse me?
It took long enough.
Yeah. All right, anyway, before I turn it back to my esteemed colleagues here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're good, sir.